What's going on, guys? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a comparison between the OnePlus Nord N200 5G and the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G. But before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. But with that being said, let's get into the video. So the OnePlus Nord N200 5G has a 6.49-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 405, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. We got a hole punch up here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 16 megapixels. Overall, the phone has a really nice modern look, super sleek design, and high quality feel. It has a decent amount of weight to it, which I can really appreciate. And right now, I do have the brightness at 100%, and it looks really nice, really high quality, and it's a pretty average size, making it super comfortable to hold in your hand and carry in your pocket. And with this, combined with a great quality 90Hz display in 1080p, which in this price range, while not being exactly unheard of, is really not that common, makes for a great device to use for content consumption. Now the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G has a 6.82-inch IPS LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 263, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. We got a water drop notch up here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 16 megapixels as well. So overall, a few differences here. As you can clearly see, the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G is much bigger than the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. But on the other hand, the OnePlus has a much higher quality display. It's kind of debatable which thing is more important. Having a larger display is going to make streaming videos and stuff like that a little bit more pleasant. But at the same time, so is having a higher quality display, especially with the 90Hz refresh rate. That's going to make movement on the screen a lot smoother and faster. So it's really up to personal preference. Personally, I would prefer the larger display, but at the same time, having a nicer quality display is really nice. So I would say, all things considered, these phones are about equal in the advantages they provide as far as the display goes. But that being said, I do like the design of the OnePlus phone much better than that of the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G. The T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G is a lot bulkier and more uncomfortable to carry, and it has a more clunky, kind of old looking design that doesn't feel very premium. Whereas with the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, you really get a nice premium, higher end feel from this phone. So I will give the advantage to this phone in terms of the design. For storage, both of these phones have 64 gigabytes with microSD card expansion as well. So they're equal there, and that is a pretty good amount of storage. For the average user, that's really all you're gonna need. And if you're a power user, you can always use a microSD card as well. Both of these phones do have a fingerprint scanner right here on the power keys. Real good spot for it. And they have face unlock too. Starting with the OnePlus Nord N200 5G, we're gonna test out these fingerprint scanners and see how well they work. There we go, one more time. And there we go, real fast and responsive, no issues there. Moving on to the Revvl V Plus 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. Both of these fingerprint scanners are really good and work really nicely. I have no complaints. So moving on to the rear camera setups. The OnePlus Nord N200 5G has a 13 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. It has a max video quality of 1080p in both the rear and the front cameras, so pretty standard. The T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G has a 16 megapixel rear camera, a 5 megapixel ultra-wide camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, this phone can shoot 2K in both the rear and front cameras, so a little bit higher resolution than the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. So for the features, they're pretty even. It really just depends on which features you actually want. On one hand, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G has a macro camera. But on the other hand, the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G has an ultra-wide camera. Neither of them have both, so it really depends on your preference. I personally would choose the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G because it has an ultra-wide camera, and I care about that a lot more than macro cameras. But if you do like taking macro photos, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G is of course going to have a better setup for your needs. Now, as far as video goes, the quality of photos and videos taken by both these phones is pretty evenly matched, so I will give it to the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G here, because although the overall shooting quality is in general around the same, the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G can shoot in 2K, which is a higher resolution than the max quality of videos you can shoot with the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. Internally, the OnePlus Nord N200 5G is getting 4GB of RAM, with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 480 5G processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone and it came back with a single core score of 507 and a multi-core score of 1554. For this price range, this is really good. You're going to be able to do pretty much anything you could reasonably expect to do out of a phone. Might not run as fast as a flagship phone, and it might struggle a little bit on more high-end activities like playing Fortnite, but at the same time, it's going to be able to do pretty much anything. And if you're just using the phone for daily activities, like sending text messages, going on the internet, and checking social media every now and then, this phone's going to be able to handle that stuff like it's nothing. The T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G is getting 4GB of RAM as well, with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone and it came back with a single core score of 541 and a multi-core score of 1692, so it's actually a little bit more powerful than the processor of the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. This phone is going to have the same kind of capabilities, but it's going to be able to do everything a little bit better. So if you're doing something like gaming, this phone might be a better choice just because of the slightly higher processing power. But if you're just doing basic activities, it's really not going to make a huge difference, although keep in mind this phone is probably going to be a little bit faster. As far as what you can really do on this phone, there's really not going to be a whole lot that you can't do. I mean, I was playing Call of Duty on this phone earlier, which is probably why it took me so long to record this video. This is a really good processor, as is the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. Both of these are really fast and powerful phones, especially for their price range. Now, these phones have the exact same battery specs, both with a 5000 mAh battery that supports 18-watt fast charging. So really not a whole lot to say here. One of the biggest batteries you can possibly get in a phone. I've really only seen one or two other phones that have bigger batteries than this, and they were both international phones anyway, so long story short, you're most likely not going to get a bigger battery than these phones have, and the fast charging really helps too, especially if you're in more of a hurry. Another nice thing that both these phones have is NFC. NFC is the technology behind contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay, Samsung Pay, Apple Pay, all those things. So you do need a phone with NFC in order to use those services, and that works out real well because both these phones have it. So in conclusion, which one of these phones is better? This is actually a real close call, and it really depends on what you value the most. The OnePlus Nord N200 5G looks so much better in my opinion. It has a more high-end feel. It has a much higher quality display. With a 90Hz 1080p display, you're gonna get a lot of value out of that, especially if you're doing stuff like viewing photos and streaming videos. And it also has a macro camera, which the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G doesn't have. But on the other hand, the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G has a much larger display, which could give you a better experience with content consumption as well. It really depends on your preference. I personally would prefer a larger screen if I'm doing content consumption, if I'm streaming videos, playing a game, pretty much anything, because even though it might not look quite as high quality on this display, it's going to show up a lot larger and be easier to see. This phone also has an ultra-wide camera and can shoot in 2K, which the OnePlus Nord N200 5G doesn't. So honestly, these specs are so close, but I would say in general, the T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G does have a few more advantages than the OnePlus Nord N200 5G. The T-Mobile Revvl V Plus 5G not only has an ultra-wide camera, which I think is more useful than a macro camera, but it also has a much larger display and a more powerful processor in general. But on the other hand, if you do want a 90Hz display and you really want to have a 1080p resolution as well, and you're looking for a phone that just looks nicer and feels higher end, then the OnePlus Nord N200 might be a better option. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video.